Hi, and welcome. It's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. And welcome to a continuation of curriculum topic number one, what we started in-person, face-to-face class the other day, called History and Purposes of Secondary Ed. The purpose of topic one is to explain the background and the evolving purposes of secondary education in the United States of America. So the other day we took a look at the history of secondary ed and the purpose of secondary education. In this video, let's deal with school district and teacher accountability. At our last in-person, face-to-face class, we surveyed briefly the history of secondary education in the United States. And we started off with the first public schools in the 1600s. And we looked at the first high schools. We looked at the Prussian education model as introduced to this country by Horace Mann, known as the father of American education. And then we looked at some laws and also how education started to welcome different groups to be more inclusive throughout the 20th century and early 21st century. We concluded that in-person class meeting with a consideration of what is the purpose of secondary education. And to support that, we looked at the United States Department of Labor categories of 5 job zones. You'll recall that those 5 job zones start off with no preparation and finally a high level of education and preparation to enter the workforce. And we looked at the availability of jobs in each category and also the average salary and how much education and training is required to meet up with each of these categories. And then we held a spirited discussion about what is or what should be the purpose of high school. Should we be preparing students for college or for jobs? Should we be focusing in high school on kids who don't plan to go to college, so that's going to be the extent of their training, or what purpose should it be? For today's class, let's start considering teacher and also school accountability. To lead into this discussion, let's start by defining effective teaching. Effective teaching consists of planning. It consists of all the work that a teacher does before entering the classroom. It consists of implementing, so these are all the teaching activities that a teacher engages students with and how the teacher delivers instruction, and also assessing how the teacher determines whether or not students, and to which extent students have acquired that information and now can be said to have truly learned it. Further, according to Duplass, teachers bring 3 distinct areas of information to the table, so to speak, and things in which they impart to their students. The first of which is knowledge, and knowledge, according to Duplass, consists of 3 different types. First of all, it's professional knowledge, and this consists of everything that teachers understand historically about schools, about what they understand about students, and the communities in which they are teaching. So that includes schools and the system of education, as well as understanding students. A second type of knowledge is pedagogical. So this involves the theories and teaching methods and understanding best practices and research about effective teaching. So it's how to teach. The third type of knowledge, according to Duplass, is the pedagogical content knowledge. So a teacher has to understand his or her own subject content area, but in addition, that teacher should also understand the unique methods that are particular to their subject domain, and how to apply specific strategies to most effectively teach that particular subject. A second main characteristic, an item that teachers, so to speak, bring to the classroom, bring to the table, is skills. They have the ability to use knowledge effectively to make sure that students are learning. So in other words, we're talking about the abilities of the teacher, and that's built up through both education and training as well as practical experience in the field. So a teacher has to be skilled in teaching. The third important teacher characteristic is the dispositions of that teacher. So when we refer to dispositions, we're talking about the teacher's values and and beliefs and professional ethics, things that are ingrained in a teacher, not just as a professional, but also as a person within a professional within a particular content area. So in other words, if you're a chemist, you're teaching chemistry, you think like a chemist. There are certain dispositions that are common to somebody in that particular subject domain, but also we have to focus on the dispositions of the professional as an adult, as a citizen, and as a teacher. So in terms of dispositions, we're talking about the teacher is guided by these beliefs and attitudes, and these things really support positive teaching and positive rapport and relationship building with the students. And while these dispositions are in the affective domain, in other words, they reside within the teacher, they will certainly display themselves in everything that the teacher does. Due to technology, social media, and other media outlets, there's a much increased awareness by the public of schools, school funding, the teaching profession, what goes on in schools, how much money is supporting schools. Given all of this, teachers feel more and more the pressure to improve the quality of teaching, the quality of the curriculum that we teach, and also the performance of their students. But how can you actually measure teaching and school effectiveness? Here are three commonly used measures of teaching effectiveness. First, there's the value added comparison. For this measure, we can measure the difference between student scores at two different times. So we can look at when students come into the classroom and do a pre-test, and after the intervention offered by the teacher, in other words, after the instruction has taken place through an academic year, we can compare the student's score in the post-test, and we can try to determine what's termed the value add. So what value did that experience add to those students? A second measure is teacher test scores. We all know that teachers have to take a series of standardized national tests and or state tests in order to be recognized as a teacher. So according to the teacher test score method, we would correlate the teacher scores on those tests with the achievement of students. A third measure is teacher content knowledge. Especially in the secondary ed area in Pennsylvania, we find that teachers are measured more on their content knowledge rather than their teaching ability in standardized tests. And certainly, both are measured during student teaching and other hands-on observations of teachers in practice, both in college as well as first-year teachers. But in this case, we would measure the teacher content knowledge because teacher content knowledge has been shown to be a major influencer in high school of student learning. Let's now engage in a brief survey and history of some of the methods of measuring teacher and school effectiveness in the state of Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, in 1999, we adopted the academic standards for reading, writing, speaking, listening, and also math. Now, these standards identify what a student should know and what they should be able to do when they complete various grade levels. In our state, school districts possess the freedom to design curriculum, and they can change, they can add to, they can exceed the expectations of these standards, but those schools have to at least hit these standards. A primary way of measuring whether or not schools and teachers have helped students meet those standards is the PSSA. And of course, that refers to the Pennsylvania System of School Assessment. It's an annual set of tests that are given to students in various grades. It's a standards-based, criterion-referenced assessment, and it's meant to measure students' attainment of those standards and again determine the degree to which the programs enable students to meet the proficiency of those standards. In other words, we're trying to evaluate the schools in the process, and they're given to students in the areas of reading and math, writing in certain grades, and science in specific grades. In Pennsylvania, the PSSA, as we probably all know, has been a major means of trying to judge the effectiveness of schools and teachers to see if students are attaining those standards that the state has established. But it also raises a lot of interesting questions. How about if a school district has more resources than another school district? Are there correlations between the amount of resources in the school and the performance of the students? Do the state's tests really measure that which is important? And if a school district were to improve the scores, if they were to focus on, let's just really work on that PSSA, and if they were to teach to the test and improve that, would the district truly have improved? Would it be better? Would the graduates actually be better prepared for life? Would the school get more support? And should it? Or should we, as a state, as a community, should we try to support those schools that are not doing as well? Another thought is, instead of approaching it from this judgmental way, should we maybe instead focus on a growth model that, just like we do in schools, in the classroom as a teacher, do a pre-test, post-test type of model, which is a growth model to measure the starting level and the ending point, and then provide help to those schools who need help accordingly. As of the 2012-2013 academic year, the Keystone exams were implemented in Pennsylvania as another means of assessing school and teacher effectiveness. The Keystone exams were originally designed to assess proficiency in specific subject areas and to be used as a graduation requirement for Pennsylvania high school students. So the areas measured are algebra, geometry, literature and composition, biology and chemistry, and also different areas of history. Expected to go into effect in the year 2022, Senate Bill 1095, which was recently signed into law by the Pennsylvania governor, will shift Pennsylvania's reliance on high-stakes testing as a requirement to graduate. And so it's not going to eliminate the Keystone exams, but rather it will provide alternatives for students to demonstrate their readiness for success in post-secondary in several different ways. So the positive of this new law will expand options for students to demonstrate their readiness by using what they call different pathways that shows that they're able to better fit into college, into career, and also function as an effective citizen in community readiness. Having surveyed briefly the different measures of determining how effective students are attaining these academic standards. Let's turn our focus on the measures that are used and have been used to measure how schools are functioning in this process. A very significant piece of federal legislation was No Child Left Behind in 2001. And really, this No Child Left Behind was the first significant attempt by the federal government to severely impact and hopefully improve education. Their measure that would measure the elements that were described in this law, they were measured through AYP, which means Adequate Yearly Progress. At that time, to meet the requirements of adequate yearly progress, school districts, individual schools, and also groups of students categorized by different characteristics were expected to meet three different sets of requirements. They needed to achieve a high participation rate on statewide standardized tests. They needed to demonstrate growth in the percentage of students who were scoring in English language arts and also math on standardized tests. And also they were required to establish certain graduation rate targets in trying to retain students in school longer. In time, with changes in the federal administration, meaning new president and other new officials in the federal government, eventually this No Child Left Behind lost its funding. It was no longer a funded mandate, and so it was time for something else to take its place. In Pennsylvania, the system that replaced AYP that was associated with the No Child Left Behind federal legislation was called the School Performance Profile, or SPP. SPP was introduced in 2013, and here are some of the changes compared to the old AYP system. Title I schools, now these are schools that have a high percentage of low-income students and who probably require more resources and more help in order to better meet the needs of the students in those schools. Those Title I schools would receive a federal designation of either priority or focus or reward, all depending on how the schools and students were performing. Schools that were designated as priority or focus would have access to special support and help from the Pennsylvania Department of Education to aid them in improving their student achievement and performance. In other words, they needed a little more help, and PDE would now support them more. Another change was that the schools that are not designated as Title I would also have access to these interventions and supports. So all schools would really get more help from our state government in order to better meet the needs of the students and help them achieve better. In other words, improve the schools and the student performance. Our latest system in measuring the effectiveness is called the Future Ready PA Index. It was announced in January of 2017, and it went into effect in the fall of 2018. Because this is the system that in Pennsylvania our teachers and schools are using, and it's in effect for us currently, let's spend a few moments taking a better look at it. The focus of the Future Ready PA Index was several-fold. Number one, they wanted to be a little more inclusive. They didn't want to only focus on schools in certain demographics, but rather focus on all learners. They wanted to measure English language acquisition among EL students. And they wanted to take a look at career awareness instruction and start it earlier in schools. Under this system, the PDE wanted to address the issue of unequal weighting of content areas. So, in other words, focus on the importance of all subject matter, all content areas, rather than only picking out a few and kind of ignoring or lessening the importance of others. They wanted to provide indicators of student success after graduation, something that could then be measured and compared among schools and between schools. They also wanted to increase the emphasis on student access to other types of opportunities, such as AP credit, getting college credit early, and also career technical schools, VOTEC programs of study. Some other changes of this new system include allowing school districts to select their own reading assessments and math assessments and specific grades to provide additional idea of how students are progressing. It also intends to incentivize schools to offer career pathways that will ultimately give students credentials that will be recognized by business and industry. So in other words, for folks who are not necessarily going on to college. And they also mean to recognize schools who are decreasing the number of students who are scoring at the below basic level in different content areas. In other words, they're looking to support schools who are increasing student achievement. So what specific measures is the Future Ready PA Index going to focus on to determine if schools are really achieving well and how it's supporting their students to achieve? Three different things. Number one, state assessment measures. The system focuses on the percentage of students who are proficient on the PSSAs and the Keystones. Also the percentage of students who are advanced on the PSSAs and the Keystones. And also focused on the annual growth expectations known as the PVOS system. And this PVOS specifically refers to data that school districts collect, and they submit that to PDE. Secondly, the system focuses on what they call on-track measures. A new indicator that was not included before in the older systems is the English language proficiency of students. Also, chronic absenteeism. So that was another new feature. Another new feature is focusing on the grade 3 reading and also the grade 7 math. And we found that those are two content areas that are measured in other tests, but here they're going to be focused on as early indicators of student success. Finally, the third area that the Future Ready PA Index focuses on is measures of college and career success. They're looking at items such as the graduation rate of schools. They're also looking at career readiness benchmark. They're looking at like how ready are students to either enter college or the workforce or military or whatever their next step will be after high school. And just to make sure that everyone is up to date, all of these measures that we just talked about support the Every Student Succeeds Act. That's the federal legislation that was passed into law in December 2015. And it's also known as ESSA. So ESSA replaced No Child Left Behind. It didn't eliminate different things, but it did change the way that different things are approached. So in summary, as time passes, we find that there's increased accountability both for schools, for teachers, and for students to make sure that they are, so to speak, making the grade. We find that even currently, in some states in the U.S., that teachers' salaries and sometimes their pay raises are influenced by how students are performing and how their schools are performing. To wrap up today's class, let's take a look at the online Pennsylvania School Performance Profile, the SPP. In other words, like a report card of schools, both schools and school districts. Let's see how either a parent, a citizen, a teacher can go in and take a look at how schools are performing and even compare schools. When you first enter the Future Ready PA Index, it's going to start by asking what your role is. Are you a policymaker? Are you a parent? Are you an educator? Or are you someone who is maybe looking to move into the area, and thus you're looking to find out more about schools within this region, whatever region that happens to be. So when you answer, I've answered already that I'm an educator, and realize that whatever you respond to that first question will impact the way that the information is presented to you. So as an educator, I'm coming in. I can certainly go in and I can look for the school by name. I can look by district, so we can search through different districts. We can look by region and location, and that'll bring up a map, and it'll let you select from all the schools. And if I could go to Luzerne County, I could find just schools in this area. It also lets me look up the career technical schools specifically, and also lets me specifically look up the charter and the cyber charter schools, so both the online and also the brick and mortar schools. So I'm going to start off by going into the districts, because Misericordia is located in Luzerne County and in the town of Dallas. I'm going to start there. So I'm going to start in Luzerne County, and you can see all the districts, all the schools within districts are appearing. And I'm going to start off with the Dallas Senior High School. Realize that these measures are always measuring last year's data, because a school year has to be completed and compiled with data before that information can be placed on this in this site. Right in the beginning, you'll find here's the performance. Here's some fast school facts, so you can learn all about the diversity in the school. You can find different student groups, and you can find all kinds of particular information here. School district fast facts. Again, all kinds of particular information about the district rather than just the school itself. And then ultimately, you can also get to the school district website and learn location. We're going to go back to the school performance, because that's the piece we really want to focus on. And right here it says, what is the key to understand the progress? So like, what's their legend? And you can see that either they're meeting or exceeding the state goals, they're meeting or exceeding their interim goals, their target, what they're aiming at, and then are they not meeting either the statewide goal or their interim target, wherever they're at in terms of the measuring the progress, the midway or the at the end goal. So you'll find three different colors used, and then you'll find an increase, they're the same, or a decrease. So having said that, let's take a look. As we already spoke, you'll see the state assessment measures, what they term the on-track measures, and also those college and also career measures. So here you get the snapshot, the dashboard view of how the particular school is performing overall. And we can also go in and view it in more detail. So here you'll see that our local school district, one of our local districts, Dallas area, is a very high performing district. And it's very good schools. So the only problem that we see indicated, which is not really a problem for last year, it says for attendance. Not everybody had regular attendance. It's no surprise, because the COVID pandemic hit in the middle of that school year. So that's certainly, it's not an issue in general. It's indicative of what happened during that year. Now we can also export a whole summary or export the whole previous year. You can then click in and view all of the measures and get particulars of that school, whatever school you're looking at, and you can make some determinations based on all of that material. Finally, let's take a look at how you can select two or more schools to do a side-by-side comparison of those schools at the Future Ready PA Index. This time I'm going to start with the name. So I click on name, and I'm going to go and do a search. So I was searching earlier for Dallas, so I'm going to search for the Dallas Senior High School. And now I'll go to the bottom here. Here it brings it up, and I can make sure that it's the right school that I'm looking at. I'm going to click on the comparison checkbox. Then I'll go back up to the top, and this time I'm going to select another really good school district that is very close to Misericordia's campus, and that is Lake Lehman. So I'm going to start by just typing Lake, and here it is, Lake Lehman Junior Senior High School. And then I'll look below to make sure that this is the right one. Yes, it is. And I'll select that in the comparison area. And then all I have to do is click on Compare. And now, whatever elements I'm considering, I can now look at both of those schools, and I can also look at the particulars, and then I can export the comparison as well. To wrap up today's class, let's focus on our very first activity we're going to do for the semester, and that's on Blackboard listed as Project 2.1, the School District State Report Card. What I'd like you to do is twofold. Number one, go into the Future Ready PA Index and access a school in a district, either one which you're going to complete field experience for this semester, or a school that you're interested in. Maybe it's something near your home. Maybe it's a school district where you might seek to work in the future. So select one school and reflect on it. What do you learn by viewing the information that's recorded in this website, in this web tool? Secondly, I'd like you to compare a cyber charter school. You saw that there are different categories of schools, and one is charter and also cyber charter. In other words, the online charter schools. Take a look at the cyber charter and let's do a comparison of your school of choice and one of the cyber charters in Pennsylvania. And again, reflect on your findings and do that in a small narrative or a bulleted list, and let's post that as the results to Project 2.1. I hope you enjoyed today's online class. At our next class, we'll examine schools. We'll take a look at, for example, middle school versus junior high school. We'll look at different types of schools, for example, charter schools and magnet schools. And we'll examine some common practices in secondary education, for example, different forms of scheduling. See you at our next class.